Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again.
Luffy was supposed to be broken. Years of marine captivity were meant to crush his spirit, erase his dream, and silence the name of D. But they made one fatal mistake. They let him survive. Now free, Luffy sets sail not as a carefree boy chasing adventure, but as a captain carrying scars no one sees. The world thinks they know Monkey D. Luffy. They don't. He's building something bigger this time, a crew strong enough to rival Whitebeard himself. And when the Marines finally face him again, they'll realize the truth. They didn't stop the Pirate King. They created him. Disclaimer. This story do not belong to me. The author is This Captain Wears Red by OPWonders, respect to author.
Chapter 5, The Clown Showdown. I am Beast Tamer Moji, a member of the Buggy Pirates. I'm here to bring you back to Captain Buggy, 11,097, along with your friends Pirate Hunter Zoro and the thief, Nami. The man boasted, sitting tall on his lion. That sure is a weird animal suit you got on. Luffy said to him, taking in the Mont's strange appearance. How rude. This is my hair, Moji shouted, pointing to said hair as he did. Luffy only blinked while Nami hid safely behind Zoro and Zoro held onto the hilts of his swords, ready to pull them out if necessary. That's even weirder, Luffy said, his swordsman nodding in agreement behind him while Nami facepalmed. Seriously, it was like these two wanted to die. Do you think you can rest easy because you've escaped once? You must not know my terrifying skill. There is no animal in this world that Beast Tamer Moji can't tame. Moji told them as he got off his lion, walking up to a growling Chow Chow and crouching in front of him. Shake, he told the dog, holding his hand out expectantly. Everyone watched, expecting the dog to do as such, but it instead bit Moji's hand, the man freaking out and shaking it in an attempt to get Chow Chow off. Once Chow Chow let go, Moji recomposed himself, standing tall again. Your bounty is alive only, but that doesn't mean I can't rough you up a bit. If you hand over Roronoa Zoro and the thief willingly, I'll reconsider, however. Moji told Luffy with a grin. The teen frowned at that, crossing his arms. No, he said defiantly, watching as the Beast Tamer's face and emotions changed to that of annoyance. Sick 'em Richie, he shouted, pointing to the three. Nami shrieked in fear and dropped to the ground, covering her head with her hands and squeezing her eyes shut. Zoro unsheathed his swords, ready to fight the giant lion, while Luffy shifted into a fighting stance, lowering his body as the lion's paw descended on him. Right as the paw came over him, ready to crush him, he put his hands up and braced himself, successfully holding the attack off. The lion blinked in shock and there was a momentary silence as everyone else watched in surprise. Nami peeked her eye open at the silence and was just as shocked as everyone else to see Luffy effortlessly holding off the lion's giant paw. Shifting slightly, Luffy then pushed the paw up and off of him, knocking the lion off balance. It stumbled back a few feet, stunned, before growing angry once more and lowering its body, getting ready to charge again while snarling at Luffy. Before it charged though, it sniffed the air, eyes drifting to the pet shop behind them. Richie, I said get him, we can raid the pet shop after. Moji insisted, a little worried now after seeing Luffy effortlessly block the lion's attack. With a roar, the lion came running forward again, and Luffy led it, stretching his arms forward and twisting them together. Once the lion was within his grasp, he grabbed its head, jumping over it and landing behind it. Gum Gum Hammer, Luffy shouted, letting his arms unravel and begin twisting the lion, sending it into the air before landing it face first into the ground, knocking it out and shocking Moji. What are you? Moji asked in fear. Luffy didn't bother looking at the man from where he was still crouched on the ground. I ate the gum gum fruit. I'm a rubber man, he said to him while Nami stared in awe at the straw-hatted teen's strength, shakily standing up. A former Whitebeard pirate with a devil fruit power. Moji said breathlessly, realizing exactly what he was up against now. Alright, I peacefully apologize to you. The man shouted, jumping away from Luffy and holding his hands up in surrender. You don't need to apologize now. You were going to take that dog's treasure. That's why I'm gonna kick your ass. Luffy said, turning to face Moji now with a deceptively calm look on his face. Nami watched on in shock while Zoro put his swords away, seeing the threat was neutralized for now. Moji began to back away, but it was useless as Luffy's arm stretched, grabbing his throat and pulling him towards the teen. Once close enough, Luffy used his other fist to punch the man, knocking him out as well and leaving him on the ground. He remained standing there for a minute before holding his hat and turning to face the others. Walking over, he felt Nami begin to grow furious, the woman walking out from behind Zoro and stalking up to Luffy with a glare. Zoro watched with a raised eyebrow, having noticed the angry look. Pirates are all the same, every last one. They take what people hold dear without a second thought. She shouted, standing in front of Luffy now and keeping him from moving forward. Even though she knew the teen was strong, even though she knew he was a notorious criminal, she couldn't feel any of her previous fear as her anger pushed her to confront the man without any preservation for her life. As a pirate, you've probably already done the same, and will continue to do so. Maybe I should just call the Marines here right now before you can gather a crew of your own and attack people too. She shouted, tempted to attack Luffy, but holding herself back, having enough sense to not do that. As if they could take me back, Luffy said with no emotion, walking around Nami and right to Chow Chow. He sat beside the dog, looking toward where the downed lion and pirate lay. Good job, you kept your treasure safe. He told the dog, having noticed when the dog started growling at the lion, not backing down from the fight that could have happened. That bastard lion won't be coming back, Luffy told him, smiling widely to him. The dog looked at him for a second before barking once, Luffy laughing. Nami watched in surprise, her anger melting away in an instant and leaving her feeling ashamed of what she'd done, as well as a little fearful. Yeah, good luck to you too, Luffy told him before standing back up. That wasn't much of a fight, Zoro said, noticing that the fight had clearly been one-sided. Not like he didn't expect it though, Luffy was a Grand Line pirate, a Whitebeard pirate. He knew that meant he was pretty strong. That guy pissed me off, Luffy said with a shrug, turning as the mayor's scent grew stronger, noticing the man was peeking around the corner of a building. You're alive, the mayor asked in disbelief. Is it wrong to be alive? Luffy asked in confusion, wondering why the man was so shocked about it. You just fought Beast Tamer Moji and Richie and there's not a scratch on you, he said as he scrambled over to Luffy, his eyes wide. What is your purpose for coming to this town? Why are you involved with those pirates? He asked cautiously, realizing that Luffy was stronger than he had first thought. I just decided our purpose. To get a Grand Line map and a navigator, Luffy said cheerfully as he grinned to the mayor. Zoro grinned as well and walked up to Luffy while Nami continued staring, mouth agape. She hesitated, realizing that she had insulted the teen without realizing that he'd fought the lion for the sake of the dog rather than himself. Unlike everything she'd ever known about pirates, Luffy had done something for someone else rather than himself. Walking over, she frowned, looking to the ground. I'm sorry, she started, Luffy looking at her in confusion, feeling her shame and regret. Huh, he asked her, wondering what she was apologizing for. I shouldn't have yelled at you, she elaborated. Luffy smiled to her and she felt some of her hesitation fade away. It's okay, you've been through a lot, he told her knowingly, her emotions telling him as much. The navigator had gone through a lot of emotions in the short time they'd been together, and not to mention everything with the buggy pirates and whatever secret she was hiding too. He knew she must be at her wit's end by now, like Ace whenever he had too many nightmares or narcolepsy attacks. Nami smiled gently to him at his words, wondering just how wrong the news had been about Luffy being a monster. Sure, he was a pirate and she was still going to watch her every step around him, but so far everything he'd done had contradicted what she knew about pirates. I don't feel like hearing about it though, Luffy told her, hands behind his head as he turned to Zoro, the swordsman waiting for Luffy's instructions on their next move. Before they could begin to talk about that though, the mayor spoke up, frustration and determination filling him. I'm pathetic. Chow Chow and this youngin will fight so hard, yet why must I, the mayor, sit by and watch our town be obliterated? He asked in a rage, fists clenched tightly. Nami ran around in front of the man, worry on her face as she held her hands up. Zoro moved in front of the mayor as well, realizing the man was getting a little too riled up and wanted to keep him from running off and doing something stupid. Calm down, mayor, Nami told the man, hoping he'd listen. The mayor began ranting about the history of the town, telling them how the buggy pirates had shown up, and how he was tired of it. When his rant ended, a loud explosion went off, knocking down the nearby houses and shops, one of them being the doctor's office. I refuse to let them get away with this. I can stand this no more. Some scum has no right to destroy our 40 years. The mayor said, fists now clenched at his sides. I am this town's mayor. I will protect this town, he shouted, but right as he tried to run off, Nami grabbed him, holding him back. Stop, mayor, she said, trying to reason with the man, but he wasn't having it. There are fights a man cannot run from. Isn't that right, youngin? He shouted determinedly, pulling Nami forward as he struggled to get out of her grip. Luffy grinned at the man's words, laughing. That's right, old man, he told him, Nami glaring at him as she continued struggling to hold the man back. Don't encourage him, she shouted. What can he possibly do by going to see them? It's reckless, she yelled, realizing that she was trying to reason with both Luffy and the mayor at this point. I'm fully aware it's reckless, the mayor suddenly shouted, stopping Nami in her attempts to hold him back, everyone staring at the mayor. I'm coming for you, Buggy the Clown, the man said, running off without hindrance seeing as Nami had let go. The three watched him run, no one moving to stop him. The mayor was crying. Nami said softly, Luffy looking at her in confusion. He was. I didn't see it, Luffy said as Zoro placed a hand on his hip, his other arm resting on his swords. Looks like the party's getting more exciting, he exclaimed, Luffy laughing. Sure does. This is no time to be laughing, Nami chastised, worry on her face again as the mayor disappeared completely from their sight. It's okay, I like the old guy. I absolutely won't let him die, Luffy told her as he looked at her, grinning widely. The mayor had a strong, bright blue aura and good feelings. He would do everything in his power to make sure he stayed safe. In that case, Zoro said, walking towards where the mayor had run off, Luffy following. You're gonna go too? She asked incredulously, running after them a few steps before stopping. I can't let them get away with thinking I'm someone who runs from a fight, Zoro told her, tying his bandana to his head. Our destination is the Grand Line. So we're gonna steal that map back now, Luffy said as he stepped up beside Zoro, Nami watching them in shock. Luffy turned around to look at her, still smiling as he let out a short laugh. Join our crew, Nami, he told her as he held a hand out to her, wondering if she'd reconsidered on joining them or not. She had made it sound that way earlier, so he thought he'd ask one more time just in case. Pirates took the life of someone very important to me. As if I'd ever be one. She started, a scowl on her face, and Luffy was ready to call it a loss, finally realizing why Nami hated pirates so much, but then she grinned, slapping his hand. But how about we team up for our common goal? // backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash. I won't let you destroy this town, even if it costs me my life. As Luffy, Zoro and Nami walked up to Buggy's base, they saw the mayor being strangled by Buggy's disembodied hands, defiant. Fire! Buggy shouted, ordering those at the cannon to once again light it. Before they could do so, Luffy grabbed Buggy's hands, separating them from the mayor's throat and squeezing it tightly in his hands. Straw Hat! Buggy shrieked, paling at the reappearance of the pirate. Luffy grinned, looking over to him. I'm here to kick your ass, just like I promised, he called to him, smile never faltering. Behind him Zoro stood in preparation for a fight he knew was going to happen, while Nami stayed further back, not intending on engaging in the fight. Buggy struggled to have his hand returned to him, but finally, Luffy let the appendage go, watching it fly back to Buggy's arm and reattach. How dare you just come waltzing back here, to Captain Buggy, he shouted, and despite the nervousness and fear that Luffy could feel coming from the man, he still attempted to put on a confident front. Listen, all I want is the map and the treasure, Nami told them, wanting to make sure they didn't expect her to fight. Yeah, I know, Luffy said, not even looking away from Buggy as he spoke. The mayor, who had been coughing on the ground, finally managed to speak. Youngins, why are you here? Stay out of this, you're outsiders. This is my fight, I will protect my town, he yelled, grabbing his weapon and standing, a fierce look on his face. I don't need your meddling. Before the man could run off like Luffy knew he was going to do, he slammed the man's head into a nearby wall, the mayor falling unconscious immediately. Nami yelled out in shock, sweating again as she watched the rough treatment while Zoro didn't even blink. What the hell? Why did you attack the mayor? Nami shouted behind Luffy in anger. Maybe she'd been wrong about Luffy being different than other pirates after all. Luffy turned to her with a smile. He was in the way, he said simply. Good thinking. No doubt this old man's plans were to die otherwise. This is for the best, Zoro said, hand on his hip while Nami continued gaping at them. Don't be crazy. There were plenty of other ways you could have done it, she shouted, but Luffy ignored her, instead walking closer to Buggy. Alright, here goes, he said to himself, Nami glaring at his back as he walked away from her. Big nose, he screamed as loud as he could, everyone besides Zoro freaking out at the words. That's the one thing you shouldn't say, Nami shrieked in fear, holding her face in her hands. Damn you, you flashy idiot, Buggy growled out. Flashily fire the Buggy ball, he screamed, the pirates looking at him nervously. Be but Captain Buggy sir, his bounty. Screw his bounty, I want this flashy idiot dead, Buggy screamed at them. Without any more hesitation, the pirate ran to the cannon, aiming it at the three standing below them. Why'd you say that, you idiot? Nami shouted at Luffy, running away to hopefully avoid the blast from the cannon. Hey, Luffy, run, Zoro warned his captain, he himself worried as he looked at the mouth of the cannon aimed directly at them. Luffy didn't move though, grinning as he watched the pirates getting ready to light it. That time to blow up, won't work on me. Right after Luffy's words, the cannon exploded, the red Buggy ball shooting at both Luffy and Zoro at a fast pace. Gum gum, Luffy inhaled deeply, his body expanding greatly as a result. Balloon, he shouted, the Buggy ball landing on his stomach as the pirates all watched in fear and shock. Don't tell me the Buggy ball, Buggy screamed, watching as Luffy bounced the cannonball right back at them. He bounced it back, Buggy shouted, waving as it grew closer to him. Say something beforehand, geez. Zoro said with a hand on his face, annoyed he'd been worried for nothing. The cannonball landed right where both Buggy and his crew were standing, the roof of the building exploding and creating a large dust cloud. A blast of wind blew past them all and Luffy held onto his hat to make sure it didn't fly off his head, string or no. Nami was on the ground behind him, holding her head as she braced herself against the wind. Alright, now there's fewer enemies. Luffy cheered. What the heck are you? Nami screeched, her teeth sharpening and fists at her side as she yelled at Luffy's back. You really know how to freak people out, Zoro said as he stepped closer to Luffy. As the dust cloud dissipated, the remains of the flattened building showed the many pirates that had gone down from the attack. I knew something was weird from the time you fought that lion. Nami shouted, finally standing as she continued yelling at Luffy. She hadn't seen most of the fight, too busy hiding behind Zoro and shielding herself, but she had sworn she'd seen Luffy's arms stretching just a bit too far for a normal human's at one point. No human can do that. Explain yourself, she demanded, Luffy looking at her blankly. What was that balloon inflatey thing you just did? Nami continued. The gum-gum balloon. Luffy answered easily, smiling to her as he spoke. I'm asking what it is. She shouted, teeth sharp again as her frustration grew. What are you, a monster? She asked, holding her fists up as she yelled. Luffy didn't have a chance to answer that as Buggy stepped forward, holding two of his burned-up crew members in front of him with his disembodied hands. How dare you flashily try to do me in? He said lowly, looking at the ground as his pirate hat shadowed over his eyes. He used his henchmen as shields. Nami said in disgust, arms folded over her chest as she glared at the man. Luffy and Zoro were both frowning at him as well, neither of them liking it either. From the rubble, someone shot up, looking around in confusion. What happened here? Ah, you, Moji screamed as he spotted Luffy. The teen smiled at him, raising his hand in greeting. Heya, he called, watching and feeling as Moji screamed in fear. The Straw Hat Guy. Monkey D. Luffy. CC Captain Buggy. Be careful, he has devil fruit powers too. He's a rubber person just like the news said. Moji told his captain, glancing fearfully to Luffy as he spoke. What? I should have known those Marines were onto something. Buggy said to himself. Rubber person? Nami asked Luffy, not having seen the articles mentioning it before. Yeah, see, Luffy said, pulling his cheeks in demonstration. Nami backed up, hand to her mouth in a mixture of disgust and shock at the unnatural way they stretched. A devil fruit. That explains how he bounced the buggy ball back. Buggy said to himself as another person stood from the rubble, holding Richie the lion in the air. This is the greatest insult we've had since we hoisted our flag, Captain. The new person said with a frown as he looked to Buggy. Oh, Kabaji, I'm so angry I can't even fart. Buggy told the man while Moji became angry. Kabaji, what the hell did you do to Richie? He asked in fury as he observed his lion that was now smoking from the cannonball's explosion. This cat, I used it as a shield to keep my clothes from getting dirty. He said, dropping the lion as Moji shrieked out its name, running over to it. Richie woke up briefly, saw Kabaji, and hid behind a wall in fear, making Moji even angrier as he attempted attacking Kabaji who nearly kicked him away, sending him flying towards Luffy, Zoro, and Nami. Move out of the way. Moji screamed as he flew, not wanting to run into them. No, you move. Luffy shouted back, Nami stepping out of the way as Luffy reared his leg back, kicking Moji out of the air and into the neighboring wall, Nami watching with a sweat drop. Captain Buggy. Yes, Kabaji. Please, leave this to me, Kabaji said to the captain, watching the three carefully. Alright, show them your acrobat show. Buggy told the man with a devilish smile. Kabaji matched the smile as he jumped into the air, Luffy watching in awe and Nami watching in fear while Zoro watched on indifferently. When the man landed, it was on a unicycle, a sword in hand as he cycled towards them. I, Acrobat Kabaji, Chief of Staff, take on Captain Buggy's anger. He shouted, aiming his sword for Luffy, only to be intercepted by Zoro who blocked the sword with his own. Luffy tilted to look over Zoro's shoulder, awe still on his face. I'll clash swords with you, Zoro said, smiling at the chance to finally get into a real fight. It's an honor, Roronoa Zoro. To think I would get to slay you, as a swordsman myself. Kabaji said confidently. Luffy stepped to Zoro's side, observing the two swordsmen's swords which were still fighting against each other, neither one budging from its spot. Nay, Zoro, I'm gonna fight Buggy now. You gonna be alright? Luffy asked, grinning as he felt Zoro's confidence rising as well. Of course Captain, I'll finish this guy off quick. The green-haired man said, smile widening as he glanced to Luffy out of the corner of his eye. The fight between the two swordsmen began after that, Kabaji starting off by breathing fire in Zoro's face and kicking him once the man was stunned. Nami shrieked, sweating as she stumbled away from the fight. Luffy only spared the two one more look before walking over to Buggy, but Nami stopped him, running up to him. Hold on, you're just going to fight Buggy now? Without any help? She asked, nervous that even though the teen was strong, he was going to get himself killed. After all she'd seen, Luffy seemed to be pretty airheaded and she was actually surprised he hadn't been captured by the Marines yet. Yup, Luffy told her as if it were obvious. I can't go along with this. You pirates can injure yourselves for all I care. It doesn't matter to me whether you win or lose, she said, throwing her arms up as she began to walk towards an alley. Luffy watched her go without expression while she turned to face him, grinning. I'm gonna use this chance to swipe their treasure and get out of here. Let's team up again if we ever get the chance, she said to him, still smiling as she turned towards the alley again. See ya. Good luck with the fight, she called, running off. Luffy watched her run with a smile, waving to her. Yeah, thanks, he called back, even though he could feel the lies coming from the woman, telling him she'd rather not see him again. Turning to check on Zoro's fight again, he saw that there were a bunch of tops spinning on the ground and Kabaji was cycling up into the air, making him gape in awe. Kabaji, I'll hold Zoro down. Finish him off, Buggy shouted, making Luffy realize that there was a disembodied hand flying towards Zoro. As you wish, Kabaji shouted as he began descending, sword aimed to hit Zoro. Before Buggy's hand could grab Zoro though, Luffy stepped on it, making the clown scream in pain as he held his arm and allowing Zoro to dodge Kabaji's attack. Luffy, Zoro said, realizing what his captain had done as he glanced over his shoulder to him. Damn you, Buggy shouted to Luffy as he continued holding his arm. Stay out of Zoro's fight, Luffy said with a murderous glare, hat shadowing one of his eyes as he looked at the clown. Buggy glared back at Luffy in annoyance, the two staring at each other until the fight between Zoro and Kabaji started again. Zoro, annoyed with all of Kabaji's fake tricks, told the man as much, which only angered him into charging the swordsman. With one more attack, Zoro took down Kabaji, the man falling off of his unicycle and leaving Zoro without a scratch. Kabaji, Buggy shouted in surprise, not having expected his swordsman to lose. Nice, Zoro, Luffy told his crewmate, the man turning to grin at him. If I couldn't beat this excuse of a swordsman, I would have to give up on my dream to be the greatest altogether, Zoro told him, sheathing his swords as he turned to look at Luffy and Buggy. Right, I'll handle the rest, Luffy told him, turning to Buggy and holding his bicep in his hand, grinning widely at Buggy, who was a shade paler than before, though still glaring. A former Whitebeard pirate, starting his own crew. Buggy said, glare never letting up. Yeah, we're going to the Grand Line, and then the New World, and then I'm gonna become king of the pirates. Luffy told him, the pirate gaping at the teen's confidence, before growing angry again. Get real, you flashy idiot. Former Whitebeard or not, the Grand Line and the New World are no joke. You, king of the pirates? He asked, stepping forward in irritation as he yelled, Luffy giving him no expression as he listened. I'm gonna be king of the pirates and obtain this world's treasures. Quit your dreaming, Buggy shouted. You're annoying, just bring it on already, Luffy said, shifting his stance and holding his arm slightly behind him. Buggy growled, knives appearing between each of his fingers. Seeing that straw hat of yours brings back memories of him and it irritates me. Memories of that damn cheeky red-haired man, Buggy snarled, piquing Luffy's curiosity. Red-haired, does that mean you know Shanks? Luffy asked with a frown. Huh, yeah, but why? Buggy asked, confused as to why Luffy was asking. Where is he now? Luffy asked, wondering if the pirate would know. He didn't want to run into Shanks just yet, he didn't have a crew yet after all, so if he could avoid him for now, that would be good. Dunno. Maybe I know where he is or maybe I don't, Buggy shouted with a smile. Luffy straightened from his fighting stance, giving Buggy a blank look. What are you talking about? Are you stupid or something? He asked, not understanding what Buggy had said. Either he knew or he didn't, so why was he acting like he didn't know if he knew or not? Luffy was getting a headache trying to figure it out. Not as much as you, Buggy screamed before composing himself, raising his knives again and grinning. I ain't nice enough of a guy to just tell you what you want to know, he said as if he hadn't been angry in the first place. Luffy lowered back into his fighting stance again, fist ready to fire as he grinned. Then I'll make you tell me, he answered, making Buggy laugh. I'll kill you before that ever happens. I don't care about your flashy bounty anymore, you've annoyed me far too much. I doubt rubber can bounce back from blades, he said, kicking his shoe and revealing a knife that stuck out of the front. Luffy nodded in confirmation, lips in a thin line. No, it can't, he confirmed. Idiot, don't tell him that, Zoro shouted from where he leaned against a building, watching the two. Luffy blinked at the swordsman, not realizing why he shouldn't, but then he smelled Nami nearby again in the alley she'd left from. He couldn't confirm it with his eyes though because Buggy got his attack ready and he had to focus his attention back on the pirate. Bara bara rice cracker, he shouted before jumping in the air, legs detaching and spinning like a wheel as they came right towards Luffy, knives still sticking out from the shoes. Luffy didn't move and instead waited, jumping over them unharmed. Can't move in midair, can you? Buggy asked from where he had remained floating without legs, detaching his hands next and sending them, along with the knives they held, after Luffy, who was still falling from his jump. Can too, Luffy called, grabbing a nearby pillar and using it to move out of the way. Oh, quite interesting. Buggy praised. You too, Luffy said back with a smile before readying his next attack. Gum Gum Pistol, he shouted, attempting to hit Buggy in the face, but the man moved out of the way. Those are interesting abilities, but they leave you wide open, he said, raising a knife as he watched Luffy's arm continue extending past his face. I'm gonna carve you up, he shouted, about to slice the arm beside him before realizing what Luffy was doing. Bara Bara Quick Escape, Gum Gum Sickle. The two moved simultaneously, Buggy's head detaching from his neck as Luffy tried to grab it, his body shooting past the pirate and landing behind him. Not good enough, Gum Gum, Buggy taunted, Luffy frowning at the man and fixing his hat. Damn, you keep breaking into pieces, he said in slight annoyance. He'd hoped to fight the man without any haki. He wanted a fun fight, not a quick one, but it seemed he might have to use it if the pirate continued breaking apart like that. In the rubble behind him, he could feel some of the downed pirates' emotions becoming clearer, telling him they were waking up, but they made no move to join the fight, all of them continuing to play dead instead, so Luffy ignored them in favor of focusing on Buggy, the pirate starting his next attack. Bara Bara Chop Cannon, he called, letting his hand blast off of his arm, knives pointed out as it shot towards Luffy. Right before it could reach his face, Luffy grabbed the hand and held it back, the knives only centimeters from touching skin. Separate, Luffy felt with his haki what was going to happen, but only managed to move enough to not get his face cut. Instead, the string and the brim of his hat were hit as the hand shot out of Luffy's own hand, the knives slicing the string off and making the hat land on the ground. Luffy blinked at it before a fury rose in him and he glared murderously at Buggy. You bastard, he shouted, the words chilling to hear. Buggy faltered slightly at that, almost having forgotten just who he was fighting, but the rage he was seeing on the young pirate right now reminded him that he was fighting a former Whitebeard, someone from not only the Grand Line, but the New World as well, and it made him hesitate in his determination to fight the rubber teen. What? Can't stand a little nick on that damn hat? He asked, trying to keep up his confident appearance but failing as he shook slightly. How dare you? How dare you damage this hat? Luffy shouted as he looked at the cut on the brim. Huh? Buggy asked, realizing that the pirate really was getting so worked up over the hat. This is my treasure. Whoever damages this hat must absolutely pay. Luffy screamed, making the man step back from the ferocity of it. It would seem that hat has a history to it, Buggy said in an attempt to calm Luffy's sudden rage, but also to distract him as his disembodied hand rose from where it had landed after cutting the hat. That's right, Luffy told him. Is it that important of a hat? He asked, gaining back some of his confidence as he made his hand throw one of the knives, Luffy spinning out of the way. If so, then protect it better. He screamed back, his hand flying forward with the three knives it still held and stabbing through the top of the straw hat that Luffy was still holding in his hand. Luffy watched in shock as the hat was ripped from his hand by Buggy's hand, the hand moving back to Buggy as it reattached to his arm, the pirate captain inspecting the hat. How is this old tattered hat a treasure? Buggy asked in confusion, trying to find something about it that would make it valuable. Finding nothing, he laughed. Treasure refers to sparkly gold, silver, and jewels. You call this filthy straw hat a treasure? Cut the crap, Buggy said, laughing again while Luffy seethed on the ground where he'd landed after the last attack. That's the hat Shanks and I swore over, Luffy shouted, making Buggy falter again. What? Meaning this is Shanks' hat? No wonder it seemed familiar. He always wore this by my side, Buggy shouted as he threw the hat to the floor. Luffy's anger quickly morphed to surprise as he stood and looked at Buggy with wide eyes. You and Shanks sailed on the same ship? He asked. Pleased to have the boy's attention, Buggy grinned. Yeah, back when we were pirates in training. We were comrades. That damn detestable red-haired bastard, he said, stomping on the straw hat, making Luffy's anger return quick as lightning. Shanks is a great man. You, his comrade. Don't compare yourself to him, Luffy shouted as he charged towards Buggy. Bara Bara quick escape, Buggy screamed as he realized he may have gone too far. Instead of Luffy punching him like he had made it look like, Luffy swung his foot forward, kicking Buggy in the stomach rather than his now detached head. Never say you and Shanks are comrades ever again, Luffy told him in anger as Buggy reattached his head. I can say whatever I want about Shanks. Buggy coughed out. Luffy grabbed the man's face, pulling his cheeks as Buggy sweat from the close proximity to a very angry Luffy. Tell me, what happened between you and Shanks? He demanded before dropping the clown and looking to his hat. Damn it, how dare you tear up my treasure? He said in annoyance. Do you want to know that badly? Buggy asked as he sat up from the ground. He was quick to jump into the story of why he hated Shanks so much, telling Luffy about how he found his devil fruit and why he blamed Shanks for his eating it. Luffy listened on, his anger and confusion rising as he did, and when the story was finally over, he gave Buggy a blank look. That's why I won't let anyone who touches my treasure live, Buggy exclaimed, torso detaching and rising into the air as he held his knives in his hands. Luffy watched him rise, noticing Nami's scent begin to move from behind him. Let go of my treasure, Buggy shouted, his torso flying past Luffy and right to Nami who held a sack of treasure over her shoulder. Crap, He spotted me. Nami yelled as she attempted to run away, Luffy feeling her fear strongly. Instead of chasing after him though, Luffy turned to the lower half of Buggy's body which had been left behind. Don't think you can escape me, Nami. I'm going to flashily chop you up. Buggy screeched as he drew closer, but he never made it as he froze in the air, screaming in pain. Nami, who had frozen when Buggy got too close, peeked her closed eyes open and saw that Luffy had kicked Buggy in the place no one should be kicked. My balls, balls. Buggy cried, torso falling to the ground as his legs began flailing in pain. You're still dealing with me, Luffy told the man with a grin. Zoro, who had been watching silently still, winced at the attack but said nothing. Hey, Luffy called to Nami who looked over to him in surprise. Leave that treasure and get out of here. He'll come after you again. Luffy told her, pointing to the sack. No, leave the treasure and go. Absolutely not. Why should I have to leave my own treasure behind? Nami shouted back indignantly. From the ground, Buggy slowly raised his head. Your treasure, he growled out. Duh, I'm a thief who only steals from pirates, and I just stole from one. Which means this treasure is mine now, she demanded with an outstretched fist. Luffy nodded, following along with that logic. Ah, I see, he said, placing a fist in his open palm in understanding. Nonsense. That's my treasure. Do you think stealing it makes it yours? Buggy shrieked. Honestly, what kind of upbringing did you have? Buggy chastised. Nami gave him an unimpressed look, still not moving from where she stood in front of the man. A criminal, trying to lecture another criminal. Ridiculous, she said, turning her head at that. What? Buggy shouted. I haven't fallen so low that I need to be corrected by pirates. Nami said with a smile, sticking her tongue out at Buggy at the end only making the captain seethe. I hope you're ready to face the consequences, Nami. Bara Bara. Festival. Buggy shouted, his entire body breaking into pieces, some of them hitting Nami who dropped the treasure, trying to defend herself. Luffy yelled in surprise as the bottom half beside him broke into pieces as well, all of them flying back to their owner. Just try and help your friend if you can, gum gum. Buggy yelled to Luffy as his body floated around in separate pieces. Damn, he broke into even more parts. Luffy exclaimed. He didn't have a chance to do anything when he spotted Buggy's feet slowly walking back to Buggy himself. What the? Picking up the foot, he ignored the shouting coming from Buggy and Nami as he worked on pulling the foot out of the boot. Coochie, coochie, coo. Luffy said as he tickled the foot, Zoro sweat dropping and sighing as he watched. Luffy then began pulling on the skin before realizing he needed to move on to more drastic measures. Geez, you're stubborn, Luffy shouted, raising the foot into the air before slamming it into the ground. Behind him, Buggy screamed in pain, turning to look at him. Knock it off, he shouted over to Luffy who only stared back. No, you knock it off. Nami screamed as she swung the bag of treasure at Buggy. The pirate used this to his advantage though, grabbing onto the bag with his two disembodied hands and smiling to Nami, his head also floating by itself. Thanks for the treasure back, he told her with a grin making Nami shrink back in disgust. Let go, that's mine, Nami shrieked as she began swinging the bag around, trying to get the hands off. Let go, this is my treasure, you let go, Buggy shouted at her. Annoyed, he let his hands go, each holding a single knife as they aimed at Nami. Die, he shouted, trying to stab her with them, but was once again interrupted. I told you, you're dealing with me, Luffy shouted, running over and kicking Buggy's floating head into the bag of treasure, and admittedly using a bit of hockey in the kick, wanting this fight to be over now. The bag ripped open, treasure spilling out all over the place as Buggy laid on the ground, Luffy feeling how much pain the man was in. Consider that a kick from the old mayor guy, Luffy told him with a grin, Nami staring at him on shock from the ground where she'd fallen. Thanks, I owe you one, she told him. Yeah, no problem, Luffy told her with a smile before the two of them both realized something at the same time. Oh yeah, the map, my treasure, they said simultaneously, looking towards the scattered treasure to see Buggy's head back up and floating. This isn't over yet 11,097. Buggy growled in anger, making Luffy frown at the mention of his number. How dare you flashily do this to me? You'll pay for this. Assemble, Bara Bara parts. Buggy announced, but all that came back to him was his feet and hands, making him scream in shock. Buggy and Luffy stared at each other, the silence reigning as they both realized what had happened, neither making a move. Looking for these? Nami asked, tugging a rope that was tied around all of the parts Buggy had disassembled, her foot stepping on them to keep them down. My parts. Buggy shrieked while Luffy laughed joyously, stretching his arms far behind him. Way to go, thief, he praised, Buggy's eyes widening in fear as he saw the incoming attack. Stop, he shouted in terror, Luffy only continuing to grin. Go flying, Buggy. Gum gum. His arms shot forward, flying past him and right towards Buggy who tried uselessly to defend himself by putting his floating hands in front of himself. Bazooka, Luffy shouted, hitting the pirate and sending him far into the sky, no one able to see him. I win, he cheered, arms raised in congratulations to himself as he laughed again. His first enemy pirate fight on his own and he'd won. Even if the fight had been annoying near the end, he'd still fought a pirate captain all by himself and won without a scratch. His joyous mood was quick to change though as he remembered his hat. Walking over to it, Zoro met him at the battered straw hat, the swordsman picking it up and handing it over to his captain who took it with a frown. "It's all torn up now," he said softly as he examined the 3 large slash marks on the top of it, as well as the cut to the brim and the strings which were now gone after being cut off. "Oh well, I can still put it on, plus I sent Buggy flying so I'm satisfied," Luffy said, putting the hat on his head with a small smile, still a little sad about the damage. From behind him, he felt Nami's turmoil, a sadness of her own flaring up momentarily before she spoke up. "It's all right, I'll fix it for you later," she said, looking away with a small frown. Luffy blinked in shock as he and Zoro looked to the orange-haired woman. What?" Luffy asked, not having heard her seeing as she'd spoken too softly. "Nothing. Hey, anyways, I split it into 2 bags, so carry half of it." "It's too heavy for me," Nami said louder to him, holding up a smaller bag of treasure to Luffy and Zoro. "There sure is a lot," Luffy said as he took in the size of the 2 bags. "If anything, Buggy does know quality treasure when he sees it. All this should go for no less than 10 million berries," Nami said happily, holding the bags to her cheeks. Luffy only smiled to her, feeling actually happy feelings in Nami for the first time since he'd met her. Under Luffy's gaze, Nami's smile faltered though and she put the bags down, grabbing something from her pocket and holding it out to Luffy. "Here you go," she said, confusing Luffy as he looked at the roll of paper. He asked, not taking it yet. "It's the chart of the Grand Line. Didn't you want it?" Nami asked in confusion, having heard Luffy many times as he adamantly claimed he was going to get the map and go to the Grand Line. "You're giving it to me?" Luffy asked in surprise, Nami turning her head away as he did. "You did save me," she said, Luffy grinning again. "Thanks, Nami," Luffy thanked as he took the map. "I finally got a map of the Grand Line. Hooray. Zoro, look, Luffy said, holding the map up to Zoro's face. The swordsman backed away from how close Luffy was but smiled. "Nice work, Captain. I bet there's all sorts of adventure waiting for us there," he said, excited for more fights to come, as well as getting closer to reaching his own goal. "Oh, does that mean you'll join our crew?" Luffy asked, remembering that he'd wanted to ask Nami that. Zoro watched the woman, wanting to know her answer too because as nice as it was to have a map, it was useless if no one could read it. "I told you, I'm never going to join a pirate crew," she said with her hands on her hips, pausing in her words. Luffy only continued grinning, feeling her emotions were more of amusement than her previous hate whenever she'd said the words before. "But okay, staying with you guys seems profitable enough. But I'm only teaming up with you, just so you know. Always remember that," she told him. Luffy smiled his D-smile and nodded. "Yeah, hear that Zoro? We got a navigator and a map of the Grand Line," Luffy said, turning back to Zoro who rolled his eyes. "I'm standing right here you know. I can hear everything you're hearing," he said, but like with Nami, Luffy only felt amusement coming from the man, making him laugh again. "Alright, let's get going," Luffy cheered. "Now hold on, we have to go help the mayor," Nami said to Luffy before he could run off. "Oh yeah, we gotta wake up the old mayor guy now," Luffy said as he looked over to the still unconscious mayor. "You there?" A new voice had all of them looking over to a large crowd of people armed with spears. "Are you outsiders?" the man in front asked. "Yeah, who are you?" Luffy asked in confusion, wondering where all these people had come from. "Were this town's citizens? Did the pirates have a falling out or something? If you know anything, tell us," the man shouted, Luffy, Nami and Zoro frowning at them. "Oh, it's just the citizens. I thought they were more of the pirates," Nami said, smiling in relief. "Oh, Mayor," one of the citizens said as they saw the downed mayor. "Oh no, say something. Hey, Mayor, he's out cold. The pirates definitely did this. How horrible." The citizens all began talking one after the other. Nami and Zoro both looked away, Zoro whistling innocently while Nami smiled as she sweat. Luffy, however, didn't have the sense to do either of those things. "Sorry, I kicked that old man's ass," he said, making both Nami and Zoro stiffen in shock that he'd admitted it. "What?" all the citizens asked as they turned to him, anger rising in them that Luffy had to actively block out. So many people, all angry at once, made it harder to do, but he managed it. "Hold on," Nami shouted at Luffy in annoyance. "You didn't need to tell them that, idiot." Zoro shouted next. "You two saw it," Luffy told them as he looked over his shoulder at them. "Yeah, but you had an actual reason," Nami started, before stopping when she saw the now much closer armed citizens. "Why did you guys do this to our mayor?" the man from before asked angrily. "Don't give us your excuses." Another shouted. "Who are you? Are you with those pirates?" a third asked. Nami was watching in fear, realizing that the citizens were getting dangerously riled up, many of them holding weapons that could do damage to her. "We're pirates," Luffy deadpanned honestly, not even trying to hide it. Nami began falling in shock while Zoro face-palmed before laughing loudly at his captain's words. Just as we thought, the crowd shouted in unison. You idiot, Nami shrieked, Luffy shying away from the woman who had gotten extremely close in her rage. It's the truth, he said in his defense. Pirates, how dare you ravage our town? We won't show mercy just cause you're kids. Luffy ignored the yelling crowd and turned to Nami and Zoro, walking closer to them. What now? Doesn't look like they'll hear us out, Zoro said, wondering what Luffy had planned next. He grinned to the both of them, his grin, before running past them. Run, he shouted, laughing as he did. Nami was quick to scoop up her 2 bags of treasure and follow while Zoro smiled and did the same. There's no escape. How dare you hurt our beloved mayor? The crowd quickly gave chase after the two, Nami looking behind them worriedly. Why did you make things worse? She asked. This is a good town, Luffy told her, confusing her. She asked, not knowing why he was saying that all of a sudden. Everyone's so mad just for the old mayor guy, Luffy told her, making her look back with a frown. I think they'd get mad at any excuse we give. Luffy laughed, Zoro nodding in agreement. We're turning here, Luffy suddenly said, smelling the docks as he turned sharply into the alley beside them. Zoro and Nami both ran past it before backtracking, glaring at Luffy. Hold on, Nami shrieked. Don't say that so suddenly, Zoro shouted in annoyance. As they ran down the alley, they saw Chow Chow at the end of it, sitting there unmoving. Zoro and Luffy both jumped over the dog before they trampled it while Nami ran around it. Chow Chow, she said in surprise. Dog, Luffy said with a grin, having smelled the animal there already. They continued running though, and they heard as the dog began barking at the crowd that had attempted to follow them into the alley, stopping them. Hey, move, Chow Chow. Hey, those guys are bad pirates. You're barking at the wrong people. Why are you getting in the way? Chow Chow, let us through, Chow Chow. Chow Chow didn't listen though, continuously barking at the crowd as he refused to move. Luffy looked back at him, smiling. Later, dog, he shouted to Chow Chow as they reached the end of the alley. Without having to worry about the crowd anymore, the three slowed their pace, and eventually, they reached the docks. That was scary. We managed to escape thanks to Chow Chow, Nami said, wiping the sweat from her forehead after placing the 2 bags of treasure in front of her. Why do we have to deal with this? She asked, tired after everything she'd been through today. Does it matter now? We're done here anyway, Luffy said to her. Maybe so, but, hey, is this your boat? Nami was cut off when Luffy spoke instead, realizing they were standing in front of a different boat than his. It's great, Luffy said as he admired it. I don't think it's so great. I stole it from some idiot pirates, she said, hands on her hips as she looked at the boat. That's a big mouth ya got, a voice said from the boat, 3 of Buggy's pirates poking their heads up. Been waitin' for ya, thief girl, the man said as they stood up. Never thought you'd run into us here, did ya? The other pirate asked. Nami, still smiling, laughed nervously at them. You know them? Luffy asked, feeling the recognition in Nami, but also the nervousness. Yeah, sort of, she said, Luffy feeling it was the truth. Not sort of, we're bound by fate. So, you had friends, huh? Guess we'll have to punish you too, the pirate said as he and the other 2 stepped off the boat and looked to Luffy and Zoro. Once they took in Zoro, however, they jumped back in shock, all 3 of them screaming in fear. With that, the 3 pirates ran off without another word, Luffy watching in confusion. What was that about? Luffy asked, Nami also confused. Idiots being idiots, Zoro said with a shrug. Luffy and Nami shared a look before shrugging as well and getting ready to leave. Luffy and Zoro got their small boat, tying it to Nami's larger boat and setting off together. With the sails down, they could see that Nami's ship was painted with Buggy's Jolly Roger. Isn't that Buggy's mark on your sail there? Zoro asked from his and Luffy's boat. Nami, who stood on her boat, shrugged. Well, this is his boat. I'll get rid of it sometime, she said nonchalantly. Hey, wait, youngins, a familiar voice shouted from the port they were slowly drifting away from. The old mayor guy, Luffy said as they all turned to look. Thanks, we're in your debt, the mayor shouted to them, tears falling from his eyes, but Luffy could feel that they were happy tears. Don't worry about it, take it easy, Luffy yelled back with a laugh. Hey, wait a minute, where's the other bag of treasure? Nami asked as she looked for it. Oh, I left it behind, Luffy told her with a smile. What, you left one of my treasure bags? She shouted, leaning over her boat's railing as she yelled at Luffy. Yeah, just one is worth 5 million berries you know, she screamed, leaning even further over the railing. But they need money to fix their destroyed town, right? Luffy asked. That was my treasure, Nami shrieked, leaning even further to the point that she was almost butting heads with Luffy. Do you know how much I suffered trying to steal it? She asked, grabbing Luffy's head and dunking him into the water in between their ships. Why did you do that? Nami asked in anger. Stop, I can't swim, Luffy shouted whenever his head was above water. Even though that was true after a certain point, Luffy was mostly unpleasantly reminded of when Haru would shove both he and Ace into water tanks over and over. It was harder to push those memories back than it should have been. That's the point, Nami shrieked above him. If you want it, go back and get it then. Luffy shouted, wanting to get out of the water, because every second he was forced into it, the harder it got to keep the memories back. I can't do that. You go there. Nami shouted. No. Wah, that's dangerous. I could die, you know. Luffy shouted back, almost at the point that he couldn't hold it back anymore. Zoro began laughing behind him, finding it all amusing, and finally, Nami let him go. He collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily and staring at the sky in relief, happy to be out of the water. He wouldn't let the others know how much that had bothered him. Do that again and I really will throw you into the ocean. Nami warned. Well, for better or worse, looks like a navigator joined our journey, Zoro said as he looked to the sky as well. Luffy hummed in agreement, smiling lightly. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me, the author is. This Captain Wears read by OPWonders. Chapter 6, Captain Usopp's Grand Entrance. Time passed by slowly, but Luffy didn't mind. Back when he was on the Moby, there were always so many people, so many things happening at once that it was always chaotic, and sometimes even overwhelming. Now that he was on his own only sailing with 2 other people, it was much calmer and more peaceful than it had ever been in all his time on the Moby. Of course, there were pros and cons to both situations, and he loved both everyone on the Moby as well as his 2 new friends here equally. It was just different was all. The 2 boats slowly sailed across the ocean, Nami telling them that they should reach the next island by tomorrow. This meant that Luffy had to entertain himself until then, though. Nami was still on Buggy's ship, not having come over to their smaller boat at all, and Luffy decided he wouldn't go bother her over there unless she wanted him to. Even though she'd agreed to come along with them, Luffy knew she was still apprehensive and cautious of them, so he would leave her alone. However, that meant he was on a smaller boat with not much room for activities like he'd wanted. Zoro didn't seem to mind, the man napping against the railing in the sun, and Luffy decided that he wouldn't mind a nap either. He had had a long day after all, what with getting carried away by a bird, being thrown in a cage, fighting a lion, some pirates, and Buggy, and then finally running away from the citizens of the town. It had been a long, eventful day, so a nap would be a welcome joy right now. Jumping off the bow, Luffy moved to sit against the railing, tilting his hat over his eyes so that it would shield them from the sun, but then he was reminded of its tattered state when the sun leaked through the slashes on the top of it. He frowned, taking the hat off and looking at it carefully, feeling the edges of the torn straw. If you give me that, I can sew it back up for you, Nami said with a slight hesitance from her boat. Luffy turned to her in surprise, blinking as he took in the woman's emotions. Looking from his hat, then back to her, he grinned. Really? He asked excitedly, pleased with the idea that the hat could be fixed. Nami hummed, holding her hand out over the railing towards Luffy, who handed over the hat. It's really that important to you? She asked as she pulled out a needle and thread, sitting against her railing as she got to work. Yeah, it represents a promise I made a long time ago. It's my treasure, Luffy said, beaming as he thought of Shanks. Nami looked over her shoulder at him and eyed his expression carefully before turning back to the hat. You should be more careful with it then, she said matter-of-factly. There was a silence as Luffy watched Nami work, leaning on his railing and watching the careful needlework as the redhead worked. It was nostalgic, reminding him of when he would watch Izo work on sewing up his ship brother's clothing, sometimes even his own clothes. Eventually, the navigator finished up, putting her supplies away and handing it over to Luffy, who cheered. You fixed it, he called out happily, holding the hat in the air and noting that there were no more tears in it. I only sewed it back together. If you're too rough with it, it'll rip again, so be careful, Nami said, holding the needle in her mouth as she put the string in the bag. Thanks, Luffy said to her, and Nami was about to tell him it was no problem, she did owe him after all, but then Luffy poked a hole through the recently patched up hat, looking to her as he sucked in his lips. Idiot, she shouted, leaning over the railings and poking him in the forehead with the needle she'd yet to put away. Ow, you poked me with the needle, Luffy cried, rubbing his forehead. I know, it's the only way I can hurt you, she said as she took the hat back to fix again. Oh, you're right, Luffy agreed, understanding now why she'd done it. Nami sighed in irritation while Zoro peeked an eye open at them. Stop all that yelling, I'm trying to take a nap, Zoro told them, closing his eye again and resuming said nap. Luffy looked to him and laughed quietly to himself before settling against the railing as well, arms behind his head as he looked at the sky. It was quiet again, only the sound of the waves hitting their boat breaking the silence while Luffy waited patiently for his hat to once again be fixed. A few minutes later his view of the sky was blocked as the hat was pushed over his eyes. There, if you rip it again, I'm not fixing it, Nami said, crossing her arms as she looked at Luffy with a stern look. The teen lifted the hat up from his eyes, noticing the hole he'd created was gone once more and beamed, nodding to Nami. Right, thanks again Nami, he told her, the girl only huffing and disappearing into the cabin of her boat, leaving Luffy with a sleeping Zoro. Deciding to take the nap he'd planned on taking earlier, Luffy pushed the hat over his eyes again, smiling as no light peeked through this time. It was some time later that the peaceful air took a quick turn. With a start, Luffy woke up, his eyes wide and breathing slightly heavier. He had a moment of panic when he saw how dark it was, his mind telling him that he was back in the dark cells, back in the facility, back with the doctors, with Haru. Before he could panic too much though, he felt his hat and realized that was what was blocking his vision. There were only two presences near him, both relatively calm in comparison to him, and when he felt that, he remembered where he was and what was happening. Lifting his hat up, he saw Zoro lounging still, though now he was awake and looking to the sky. Nami was nowhere to be seen, so she was most likely inside her cabin still, but Luffy didn't mind. He'd had all the confirmation he needed to remind himself that he was out on the open ocean, free from the Marines, and free from the facility. Taking a few calming deep breaths, Luffy stood and went to his bag, Zoro's eyes turning to watch him as he did. Ever since the swordsman had joined, he hadn't seen Luffy touch the bag once despite the fact that it had been with them the entire time. It had merely sat at the end of their small boat untouched. Luffy knelt down, opening the bag and searching through it, pushing aside the pirate fund from Ace and the folder of his medical history from Whiskey. Resting at the bottom of the bag was the mini den to the Moby, as well as Luffy's latest journal. His many other ones were all left behind on the Moby seeing as they were full and he had no use for them. He grabbed the journal, but before he closed up the bag he saw a small tube with a cork on it. Looking at the tube for a minute Luffy finally reached into the bag and grabbed it, closing the bag afterwards and standing. "What's that?" Zoro asked, eyeing the tube as he watched Luffy walk back over to where he'd been napping previously. Luffy looked to Zoro, then to the tube, and held it out to the swordsman. "It's smelly stuff. If I go to sleep and don't wake up, open this and put it under my nose. Don't put it too close though or else I'll hit it and spill it when I wake up." Luffy told his swordsman, his face emotionless as he held out the tube to Zoro. The swordsman raised an eyebrow at that, wondering what Luffy was talking about, but grabbed the tube regardless. "If you don't wake up." "What do you mean?" Zoro asked, because that sounded ominous, as if Luffy was going to die or something. "Sometimes when I go to sleep I don't wake up. Whiskey my doctor back on the Moby she made that so people could wake me up when I couldn't." Luffy said as he sat down, opening his journal and beginning to write down his latest nightmare. Zoro watched Luffy another moment before shrugging and putting the tube in his pocket, careful to make sure that the cork stayed on. Even though he was still confused, had more questions, and wanted to know what the heck made Luffy not wake up, the look on Luffy's face told him that it would be better if he didn't ask. So he didn't. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// two lounging on their boat. Luffy turned to look at her from where he sat on the bow, an apple core in his mouth which he pulled out. Yeah, some meat would be nice to have first. Luffy agreed, before eating the apple core whole. It was the next day now, the sun high in the sky, and Luffy was still amazed by how nice the weather was in the East Blue compared to the New World. Eating nothing but fruit every day is no good, he continued as he looked at the barrel of apples that they had on board. Need some booze, too, Zoro added. Right after the last word left his mouth he was hit by an apple thrown at his head. What are you talking about? Nami asked. On the bow Luffy caught the apple that had bounced off of Zoro's head before it could fall into the water and ate it. Zoro in the meanwhile looked to the redhead who was tossing another apple in her hand, a look of annoyance on her face. That's not what I mean. The Grand Line is the most dangerous place in the world, she told them, Zoro listening with a blank look while Luffy continued eating. Actually, I think the New World is the most dangerous place in the world, Luffy corrected, munching on the apple. Nami blinked, eyebrows furrowing in confusion as she looked to Luffy. The New World, she asked. Yeah, the second half, right after the Grand Line. The New World is much worse than the Grand Line, which is why the Grand Line is nicknamed Paradise in comparison, Luffy said, having both of his companions' attention as he spoke. I almost forgot who I was traveling with, Nami said, wilting slightly as her fear sparked up again. She still couldn't quite believe Luffy was a former Whitebeard pirate in the East Blue and she was willingly traveling with him. Hopefully, he was enough of an idiot that when the time inevitably came she would be able to trick him and leave without issue. That reminds me, you said you left the Whitebeard's crew, right? Nami asked for clarification. Luffy nodded, eating the apple core of the apple he'd just finished. So does that mean you're not on good terms with them anymore? Are they gonna come after you or something? Nami asked, having been wondering about that for a while now. She didn't think any pirate crew would take kindly to deserters, especially the strongest man in the world. Zoro looked to Luffy in curiosity as well now, interested in what the answer would be. He hadn't thought of that before. Luffy had made it sound like he was still on good terms with his previous crew, but he hadn't exactly asked him outright. It would be nice to know whether they had to worry about the world's strongest crew coming after them so soon in their journey. Pops, nah, they said they were gonna let me do this on my own. They're still my family, and Pop said he'll help out if I need anything, but I don't want him to. Luffy told them. Nami sighed in relief and Zoro nodded, smiling and feeling a slight relief himself. Well, regardless, we need more people if we're going to be traveling the Grand Line. It may not be as bad as the New World, but that doesn't mean it'll be a walk in the park. The lack of crew members and equipment, not to mention we don't have a proper ship. There's no way we could survive like this, she exclaimed as Luffy looked back to the ocean in front of him. Yeah, we need a cook. And a musician, Luffy said with a smile. A musician? Zoro laughed, wondering why that was one of Luffy's priorities. You're so stupid, Nami said in defeat, wilting again. Looking out to the water she sighed. A little to the south of here is an island with people living on it. It'd be best if we can get a hold of a real ship there. Nami said as she looked at her map. Alright, time to eat some meat. Luffy cheered, arms in the air as he smiled widely. Don't forget the booze, Zoro added with a smile of his own. You idiots. // backslash slash 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 backslash. Finally on dry land again, Zoro said with a yawn, stretching his arm out over his head as he did. Luffy was looking around the beach excitedly while Nami examined it much more carefully. There's a village past here, Luffy asked Nami seeing as she had the map. Yeah, it looks like it's a small one, though, she said as she looked to her map. Wahoo. In that case, meat, 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 meat. Luffy cheered, running over to Nami to get a look at the map himself. There's a place to eat in this village, right? Luffy asked excitedly, mouth salivating at the thought of eating actual meat again rather than fruits. Forget about the meat for a minute, will you? Nami asked with a ticked-off expression on her face. She leaned her whole body away from Luffy, hugging the map closer in a poor attempt at getting him to back off. Zoro, who was still yawning and stretching behind them, suddenly perked up, eyebrow raising as he looked to the forest. Huh, careful, I think someone's nearby, he said, hand on his sword hilt as he pushed the sword out slightly. Luffy looked away from Nami now, stretching out his haki and realizing Zoro was right. Oh, yeah, there is. Hey, you, where can we get some meat? Luffy asked, surprising everyone as he looked to a section of the shrubbery up on the cliff. Instead of words, he was met with a barely audible shriek and then a barrage of pellets that came flying at his feet. Luffy was able to dodge all of them with ease while Zoro turned to watch in surprise and Nami ran for cover by the boats. Once the barrage was over, one after another, pirate flags began raising in the shrubs, and even though Luffy knew there was no one holding them, it still amazed him. So cool, he shouted out with a giant smile. Is this the time to be impressed? Nami shouted from the cover of the boat. From where Luffy had noticed a person earlier, a laugh came. Someone was standing there now rather than hiding, arms crossed over their chest as they stood confidently, but Luffy could feel that they were fairly nervous and scared. I am Usopp, leader of the great pirates who reign over this village. People praise me and then me more as Captain Usopp. At the man's bold announcement, Luffy's awe disappeared and instead, a look of confusion took over his face as he felt the lies coming from the man. If you're thinking of attacking this village, then forget it. My 80 million subordinates won't sit by quietly. Usopp shouted, arms outstretched beside him, gesturing to the many flags still waving around him. Even though he could still feel the lies, he couldn't help being drawn in by them, that awe quickly returning. Instead of calling the man out on his lies, Luffy instead pressed his hands to his face as his jaw dropped. Awesome, he shouted out while Zoro raised an eyebrow at him and Nami sighed as she shook her head, not scared anymore. It's obvious he's lying, she said, leaning casually against the boat. Yikes, she saw through it. Usopp shrieked out, Luffy's awe disappearing. See, I told you, she said with a mischievous grin, making Usopp squirm. I admitted it to her. He cried to himself. Yeah, but it still sounded cool. Luffy said, Zoro and Nami realizing now that the boy had known all along that the man was lying. Even he knew. Usopp cried louder, falling to his knees. Curse you crafty tactician, 80 million may have been an exaggeration, but I do have great men under my command. Usopp shouted, his false confidence back as he sprung back to his feet, gesturing to the now moving flags. Luffy didn't feel any lies this time, and that only caused his awe to return. Again, even though he could only feel 3 other people in the bushes. Yeah, maybe 3 people, Nami said, still grinning slyly, and Luffy briefly wondered if she had cool powers too, or even haki. She saw through it. 3 kids screamed as they stood from the bushes, each holding 2 of the flags in their hands. Run, they shouted, dropping the flags and turning tail as they ran off. Hey you guys, don't run away, Usopp shrieked, eyes bulging in shock and beginning to sweat. I've never heard of pirates using slingshots before, Nami said as she picked up one of the pellets from the sand, looking at it with a smile. Luffy laughed, turning to look at Usopp. You're neat, he said before laughing some more. He meant it too, because even though he could feel the fear and nervousness in Usopp, the man was still putting a brave front on in front of them. Hey, you, don't you insult me, I'm a very proud man. Because of my great pride, people call me, Proud Usopp. You saw it yourself just now. Usopp said as he took his slingshot out again and ready to shot. Up until the last part, Luffy hadn't felt any lies in Usopp, and again his smile left his face, watching the man with a blank look, hands on his hips. My slingshot skills are far greater than your average pistol. Usopp continued, still pulling the band of his slingshot back, ready to fire at any moment. Luffy shadowed his eyes with his hat before speaking. Now that you've drawn your pistol, are you ready to put your life on the line? Luffy asked, shocking Usopp and the others with his sudden seriousness. Usopp asked, frowning a bit. I'm saying those aren't for threatening people, Luffy said. Zoro's face changed to a smirk as he turned from his captain to look at Usopp, readying his sword again. What you're looking at now are real pirates. Zoro called to Usopp, sending him a menacing look. There were a few moments where all Usopp did was hold his slingshot ready, staring at the two pirates in front of him that were far more intimidating than he had thought they'd be for only two people. Dropping the pebble he'd held to the ground and letting the now empty sling go, Usopp fell to his knees, sweating profusely. Our real pirates definitely have way more punch behind their words. Awesome, Usopp muttered quietly. Zoro and Luffy looked at each other briefly after that before they both burst out laughing. We stole those lines, Luffy told Usopp with a smile now. Usopp asked in shock, leaning forward as if he hadn't heard them correctly. From Shanks, a pirate I respect. Luffy continued, but could both feel and see Usopp's surprise grow. Shanks. You know red-haired Shanks, the great pirate? Usopp asked incredulously, leaning back in shock. Yeah, your dad's Yasop, right? Luffy asked, recognizing Usopp's name from the many stories Yasop had told him. Usopp shrieked, this time leaning too far forward in his surprise and tumbling down the cliff, landing in front of Zoro and Luffy, who looked down at him. Yeah, Yasop is my old man. But how do you know that? Usopp asked as he sat up, eyebrows furrowed in confusion as he frowned. This is when their small group of four decided having this conversation, as much fun as it had been, would be easier if the newcomers were fed, namely Luffy. That's how they all ended up inside a small restaurant cleverly labeled Meshi. Luffy happily ate yet another plate of meat while Zoro finally got all the drinks he wanted and Nami finished her normal human-sized plate of food. Usopp sat at the end of the table, eating his own food as they all smiled and enjoyed themselves. Good, huh? Usopp asked, his mouth full as he spoke. Following his example, Luffy didn't even bother swallowing as he spoke. I met him when I was a kid, Luffy said, answering Usopp's earlier question of how he knew Yasop. So my old man's on Shanks' ship? Usopp asked with a smile, eager to hear more. Yep. You guys look the same, so when I first saw you, I wondered. Luffy told him, finally swallowing the bite in his mouth, but promptly taking another. Really? My old man's on such an awesome ship? Usopp asked, looking towards the ceiling dreamily at the thought. I saw him a couple of years ago too. He was still with Shanks then, so I bet he's still with him now. After all, your dad was a good sharpshooter. Luffy said as he picked up an apple next, remembering back on Dawn Island when he'd watched Yasop shoot an apple off of a barrel. Usopp, I heard enough about you to make my ears sore. Yasop is a great pirate, Luffy admitted, still smiling as he spoke, apple in hand. The long-nosed man leaned in closer to Luffy, grinning ear to ear. Yeah, huh, I'm proud of my old man, who leapt onto these possibly endless seas to live with his life on the line. Usopp said, Luffy feeling every bit of pride coming from the man as he'd implied, making his own grin widen. Then that makes this easier, Nami said with a smile from where she sat across from Luffy. Do you have any friends in this village who know how to sail and anyone who can supply a big ship? She asked once she had Usopp's attention. As you can see, it's just a tiny village. Sorry, but we can't live up to your hopes, Usopp said, resting his cheek against his head as he looked to the ground, smiling nervously as he spoke. On top of the hill, Zoro started, Usopp stiffening in surprise and looking to the man. There was a huge mansion. The swordsman continued, looking out the window towards where he knew the hill to be. Luffy ate his apple quietly, watching as he felt Usopp's nervousness increase. Say, do you know them, Usopp? Think you could ask them to help pay for one? Nami asked hopefully, hands clasped together in front of her as she smiled. A sudden wave of protective anger came over Usopp, causing Luffy to falter in his next bite as he blocked the feeling from influencing him, surprised by the suddenness of it. You can't go there, Usopp shouted, Nami and Zoro looking at him in surprise while Luffy finally calmed down, putting the apple down. Usopp seemed to realize his outburst and yelled out, sweating as he smiled and looked away. I just remembered something I have to do. I have lots of influence here. Eat and drink as much as you want. Alright, later, Usopp told them hurriedly as he stood from the box he'd been sitting on at the end of the table. With that he grabbed his bag and quickly ran out the door. Nami leaned out of her seat and turned to watch him leave, but Luffy was unconcerned, picking his apple up and continuing to eat it as if everything that had just happened was normal. He'd felt Usopp's lies, but he'd also felt the fear too, and the fact that Usopp had been so protective over this hill house made him realize there was probably something important to him there. Anyways, Usopp was an interesting person, and if Luffy wanted to talk to him again he'd just follow his scent and find him that way. Why is he in such a rush? Nam asked in confusion. Seeing as she wasn't going to get any answers though, she merely shrugged before turning back to the table and grabbing an apple of her own to snack on as she waited for Luffy and Zoro to finish their meals. Well, in Zoro's case it was mostly just drinks. Some time passed as they sat there, chatting amongst themselves, when they were interrupted. The Usopp pirates have arrived. Luffy looked to the doors at the three children he recognized by a scent from earlier, each holding a tiny wooden sword pointed their way. Nami turned again to look at the door, confused as to what was happening. Who are they? She asked as she observed them. The captain is gone. You don't think he? The frontmost child ran up to their table, wooden sword still raised in the air as he addressed them. Hey pirates. He started, his friends running up behind them while Luffy drank from his mug, smiling to himself. What did you do with our Captain Usopp? The one in front asked them, the same protectiveness in him that had been in Usopp earlier, along with his fear and nervousness. What did you do with him? The other two shouted in unison, the same feelings in them that were in the first child. Done with drinking, Luffy set the mug down, smiling widely as he leaned back and patted his stomach. That meat was yummy, he said contentedly, ignoring the children. Meat? Don't tell me the captain. What? What did you do? Nami laughed to herself as she realized what the children were thinking, and beside her, Zoro grinned wickedly, cheek in hand as his elbow rested on the table. If you're looking for your captain. Zoro started, giving the children a menacing grin now. We ate him, he said in a scary voice, the three children screaming in terror. Old hag, they shouted, looking at Nami with wide bulging eyes as they did, making the navigator's anger flare. What are you looking at me for? She yelled back at them angrily. Luffy blinked in confusion, not understanding what was happening. You just had to say something stupid. Nami yelled at Zoro next, who only shrugged and drank from his mug again. After everything calmed down and was explained, the children relaxed, realizing it had been a joke. When they were told that Usopp had run off on them, they realized now where he must be, telling the three pirates, or in Nami's case, ally for the moment, as much. Seeing as they were curious as to where the long-nosed man had went, they went with the children to the giant house on the hill. Luffy's suspicions confirmed that Usopp had a connection to the place. Huge, Luffy said in awe as he took in the size of the house. If our captain ran off at this hour, he'd be here. One of the children, Onion, told them. Oh, what's he come here for? Luffy asked curiously, wanting to know what was so important at this place. Did Usopp live here? That'd be cool. Maybe he would show them around and he could explore the inside of it. To lie. One of the other children, Carrot, said as if it were obvious. That's a bad thing, Nami scolded as she leaned towards the child. He's not bad. He's great, right? Pepper asked in defense of his captain, making Nami look at him in surprise. Yeah, he's great, Onion agreed. How's that work? Zoro asked in confusion. Beside him Luffy was equally confused. He'd never known lying to be a good thing, but the three children weren't lying to him, and that only confused him more. Kaya, the girl who lives here, is weak, and she's had depression ever since her parents died from an illness a year ago. Even though she has lots of money, she's so sad. So our captain tells his special made-up stories to make her laugh. 'Cause our captain's the best at telling lies. Carrot said, Luffy understanding now. Oh, so he's great. Luffy determined. Yeah, the children agreed with smiles. I like the captain's meddling side. Carrot said. I like his bossy side. Pepper said next. I like his exaggerating side. Onion finished. So that's helped her feel a little better. Nami asked, also more understanding now than she had been before. Yeah, a lot better. Pepper said to her. Great, let's ask her for a ship after all. Luffy announced with a big smile. It's thanks to Usopp that she's gotten better, Zoro said, arms folded over his chest as he grinned too. It's tough just to get in. Onion said. There are way strong guards at the gate. Pepper agreed, everyone looking towards said guards, not noticing that Luffy wasn't with them anymore. Huh, the children asked as they looked back to find Luffy gone. Where'd Luffy go? Nami asked, hands on her hips as she frowned at the empty spot beside her. I'll go ask. Luffy told them from the top of the fence that he'd climbed, everyone shouting in surprise. Wait, you're not gonna. Zoro started, watching as Luffy's grip tightened on the top of the fence, his captain letting his body fall backward as his arms stretched. Gum gum, Luffy started, ignoring the fear from the children as they screamed, not knowing of Luffy's abilities. His arms stretched. He's a monster. Pardon. Luffy started shouting in advance to anyone who might be on the other side of the fence. Sabo taught him enough manners to know he shouldn't just barge in without announcing himself first. Hey, wait, Luffy. Everyone yelled as they ran towards him, grabbing him in an attempt to stop him, but it was futile. The intrusion. Luffy finished as he flung himself as well as everyone who'd grabbed him into the air and over the fence. Yahoo! Luffy yelled out as he began getting closer to the ground. Usopp was visible to him now, the man sitting on a tree branch beside a window. Spotting the rubber teen, Usopp began yelling in fear, eyes wide as he watched the straw-hatted teen grow quickly closer to him. Luckily, he and everyone else landed just a few feet beside him. Zoro and Luffy landed on the paved walkway, Nami in the grass, and the children in the bushes. That worked great, Luffy said, his voice muffled due to his face being smushed into the now cracked and destroyed walkway. Did not, Nami yelled to him, her adrenaline making her heart pump quickly and her legs feeling like jelly due to her fear. Hey, are you alright? A woman's voice asked in concern. Yeah, it's okay, it's okay. Usopp reassured the woman with a nervous smile. They're new recruits who heard all about me and came from afar to join the Usopp pirates. Usopp told her as he sweat nervously. Luffy didn't need to feel it this time to know the man was lying. Finally, Luffy stood up, readjusting his straw hat on his head as he did. No, not me, I'm here to ask a favor, Luffy said honestly to the woman who was leaning out of her window to look at him. A favor? Of me? She asked curiously. Yeah, we want a big ship. He stopped suddenly as he felt someone with darkness start heading their way, making him frown moments before he heard them speak. You, there, they said. Luffy turned ever so slightly to see a man in a suit walking over to them with a frown. What are you doing? He asked them as he grew closer. Luffy shifted, stepping so that he was in front of his crew and the kids, not wanting to allow the man to get any closer to them than he already was. A quick check told Luffy that the man's aura was a darker gray than Morgan's had been, and he wondered if he was just unlucky to find so many dark aura-ed people so soon. Clahador, Kaya said from her window. I don't appreciate you breaking in here without permission. The man Clahador told them as he adjusted his glasses with the palm of his hand rather than his fingers. Luffy continued to frown at the man as he assessed him. Kaya knew him, that much was obvious, but he wondered how someone as innocent as Kaya, a woman with a bright blue aura, knew a man with such a dark one like Clahador. The man even had hints of the darkness inside of him, just barely there, but there nonetheless. Things had just gotten interesting. Chapter 7, Tentative Friendships. Luffy eyed the well-dressed man carefully, careful to make sure none of the kids got closer to him. The dark aura and feeling set Luffy on edge, and he was debating whether he wanted to outright fight this man or let him be. Actually, Clahador, these people are, Kaya was interrupted as Clahador adjusted his glasses again, speaking. That can wait for now. I can hear all about your reasons later, he said while Luffy glanced over to Kaya's window. He didn't feel any empathy, love, or caring in Clahador towards Kaya, yet his words and tone suggested he felt otherwise. The man began stepping forward again closer to Luffy and the teen stiffened, his frown deepening. Now leave, all of you. Or do you have something to say? Clahador asked them, stopping in his advances towards them. Luffy refused to speak to the man and behind him Nami was glancing between him and Zoro. Gathering up enough courage, the navigator stepped forward a step. Actually, we were wondering if we could get your help. We need a ship. No, Clahador told her, not waiting for her to finish as he adjusted his glasses again. Nami frowned at that but didn't speak again, Luffy once again making sure that everyone was safely behind him. Usopp-kun, Clahador announced, looking to the tree Usopp had been in moments ago, though now the man was nowhere to be seen. I've heard all about you. You're well known in the village. Clahador continued as Usopp finally climbed hesitantly back onto the branch, smiling nervously. Why yeah, Usopp asked with a nervous chuckle, Kaya watching on worriedly. I hear you've been on many adventures. Quite impressive for someone so young, he said, and again, the man's feelings contradicted his words. Instead of actually feeling impressed by this, he was filled with annoyance. Darkness, you can call me Captain Usopp, too. Since you admire me so much. Usopp called back, standing proudly on the branch. Captain, huh, I've heard all about your father, as well. Clahador told him, adjusting his glasses. What? Usopp asked, guarded now in contradiction to the smile he'd worn seconds before. Luffy's fists tightened at his side. Clahador, stop, Kaya yelled, frowning now as well. You're nothing but the son of a filthy pirate. Nothing you do will surprise me, but I ask that you stay away from the lady of this house. Clahador yelled back, Luffy's eyes shadowed by his hat as his own anger began rising. F filthy, Usopp asked, his anger visible on his face. And what's so wrong with that? For someone's parent to be a pirate? Luffy suddenly asked, surprising everyone as he spoke for the first time since Clahador had arrived. Clahador's attention turned from Usopp to Luffy now, frowning. Everything, of course. Pirates are money-hungry, greedy and will do anything they want as long as they benefit from it. It's only common sense that their children would do the same as well. Usopp, for example, is from a completely different world as Miss Kaya. I'm sure he only hangs around her for money. So, Usopp, how much is it that you want from her? Clahador asked, Luffy's blood boiling at the answer. That's enough, Clahador. Apologize to Usopp-san, Kaya shouted angrily, leaning even more out of her window. Hey, now, be careful Kaya. Usopp said worriedly as he noticed just how far Kaya was leaning out now. Unlike Klahadore, Luffy could feel Usopp's concern for the woman, whereas Klahadore had none of that despite his words. What reason is there to apologize to this savage man, my lady? I am merely stating the truth, he said as if he couldn't comprehend how he was in the wrong. Liar, Luffy told him, his frown never letting up. Again, everyone looked his way, attention filling the air as they noticed the look on Luffy's face. And who exactly are you to call me a liar? Klahadore asked, looking down on Luffy as he adjusted his glasses. Monkey D. Luffy said, eyes still shadowed by his hat, only his frown visible. It was Klahadore's turn to frown, and Luffy could feel both the recognition and the hint of fear beginning to form in the man. Monkey D. Luffy, you wouldn't happen to be 11,097, Whitebeard Pirate Monkey D. Luffy, would you? He asked, eyeing Luffy carefully now. Behind him, Kaya gasped and Usopp began sweating, jaw dropping at the words. Yeah, that's me, the teen said, the fear in both Usopp and Klahadore rising while Kaya was merely shocked, though a little worried now. And what is a Whitebeard doing here in the East Blue? I'm sure there are much bigger and better islands to go and torment than this one. Klahadore said carefully, the greed flaring again inside the man. I'm not a part of Pop's crew anymore. I'm starting my own, Luffy said, eyes finally unshadowed as he looked Klahadore in the eyes. There was silence now, Zoro watching Klahadore just as carefully as Luffy was while Nami looked around nervously, not really wanting to get into a fight at the moment. Usopp was still in shock along with Kaya, and the children were glancing between Nami, Zoro, and Luffy, wondering if they should run away from them or not. Is that so? I must ask again that all of you leave the premises immediately, pirates or not. I will not allow you to corrupt Miss Kaya's mind any longer. Klahadore said boldly, despite knowing Luffy was a Whitebeard now knew how strong he was. Another moment passed, Luffy glaring at Klahadore while the man stared back, neither blinking. Eventually, Luffy consented, moving to leave. Nami, Zoro and the children began following suit when Klahadore suddenly spoke again. Honestly, I feel for you Usopp, he said, noticing that Usopp had been about to leave as well. Everyone paused at this, looking back at the man in confusion, Luffy feeling that he was once again lying and not the good kind like Usopp. You must truly hate your great idiot of a father for abandoning you in the village because of his lust for treasure. He said to Usopp. There was a feeling in the man that told Luffy he was trying to rile up Usopp, but he didn't need his ability to feel emotions to figure that one out. Klahadore, Kaya shouted, taken aback by how mean the man was being. Don't you dare insult my father anymore. Usopp shouted in fury, his past shock and fear gone as he jumped off the tree branch, falling safely to the ground thanks to a grappling hook he had in his back. Usopp-san, Kaya called as she leaned to watch Usopp walking over to the man. What are you getting unnecessarily riled up for? Why not simply tell another of your special lies at a time like this? About how your father is really a traveling salesman, or how you're not really related by blood. Shut up, Usopp cried out as he rushed forward, punching Klahadore in the face and knocking the man to the ground, his glasses flying off his face. Luffy wasn't able to tell if he was feeling Usopp's anger or his own, his fists clenched tightly at his sides as he watched, forcing himself not to interfere as he tried taking deep breaths. This time they weren't working as well as they usually did. Captain, the children called out in surprise as Klahadore moved into a sitting position and put his glasses back on. SC, you immediately resort to violence. Like father, like son. The man spat, but even though his words were said with anger, Luffy could feel the satisfaction in him, happy that he'd been punched rather than angry like he made it seem. Shut up, Usopp shouted again, I'm proud that my father is a pirate. I'm proud that he's a brave warrior of the sea. You're right, I am an exaggerator. But I'll never lie about my pride to be related by blood to a pirate. I'm the son of a pirate. Usopp yelled loudly, and finally, Luffy was able to let the anger leave him, instead feeling proud of Usopp, deciding that he was another person he wanted to help like Nami and Zoro and Kobe. Captain, Carrot muttered softly, a pirate, a brave warrior of the sea. That's quite a twisted way of putting things. Klahadore said with a chuckle as he stood back up, dusting his suit off. But you're the undeniable proof of his savage blood. You run around spouting lies, and act violent whenever you're angry. And to top it off, you cozy up to the lady of this house so you can get her fortune. He accused, adjusting his glasses as he looked to Usopp. What? The fact your father is a pirate is more than enough proof that you'd hatch such a scheme. Klahadore yelled, cutting off Usopp, and this time Luffy felt a strange truth to the man's words that made him curious because he was saying them to Usopp, but it felt like he was directing them somewhere else. Damn it, you still won't let up. Usopp yelled as he grabbed Kuro by his shirt, raising a fist in preparation to throw another punch. Stop, Usopp-san, Kaya shouted from her window, dangerously close to falling out. Usopp froze, anger still on his face as he held himself back. Please, no more violence. Klahadore isn't a bad person. He's just trying too hard to do what's best for me. Kaya said, Luffy knowing that she was wrong about that. Not only was this man anything but a good person, but not once during this whole encounter had Luffy felt any affection from the man towards Kaya. It stopped Usopp however, the long-nosed monk grip loosening on Klahador's shirt as he let him go, hand falling. "Leave this place. Never come near this mansion again," Klahador said as he slapped Usopp's hand away from him. "Yeah, I get it. I don't need you to tell me," Usopp said as he dropped his fist now, walking past Klahador as he left. "I'll never come back here again," Usopp finished before disappearing. "Usopp-san," Kaya said softly, Luffy feeling her sadness as she watched him go. Suddenly, the kids ran past Luffy and towards Klahador, making him blink in shock for a second. "You stupid butler jerk. Our captain's not that kind of guy," Carrot shouted angrily. "Yeah, you stupid head," Pepper shouted, fist raising in the air. "Stupid head," Onion echoed. Not liking how close they were to the Dark Aura ED man, Luffy walked over to them, gently guiding them away from him. "Let's go. I don't like stupid heads," Luffy told them, glaring to the man one more time before leaving, the kids walking with him but turning to stick their tongues out at Klahador. Nami and Zoro followed after them, and it took every ounce of self-control Luffy had not to turn back and deck the butler in the face. Once they'd walked far enough, everyone stopped to sit on the side of the dirt road. Nami sat on the top rung of the wooden fence nearby while Zoro and the kids sat on the ground against it. Luffy, still feeling angry, decided it would be best to go for a walk and look for Usopp, leaving without saying anything to anyone. Smelling the air, it was easy to find the long-nosed man's scent, distinctly smelling of gunpowder and paint. The scent led him through the town and through a wooded area which immediately began calling Luffy's name. Climbing into the first tree he saw, he decided he'd travel that way from now on, Usopp's scent still clear to him from up there. Jumping from tree to tree his body slowly relaxed until he was grinning, as if everything with Klahador hadn't happened. When he found Usopp, the teen was sitting on the cliff's edge, watching the ocean. Jumping into the tree closest to the man, Luffy walked out onto a branch above the long-nosed man and let his body hang. "Yo!" Luffy greeted, face to face with Usopp as he hung upside down. Usopp shrieked in surprise and fear, leaning away from Luffy. "Here you are," Luffy said, still hanging. "Oh, it's just you. At least say something, will ya?" Usopp yelled, calming slightly. "So, what, do you want something?" Usopp asked, and Luffy could feel that the man was still annoyed and angry from what had happened at the mansion. "Not really," Luffy told him, placing his hands on the ground and releasing his legs from the branch. Now balancing solely on his hands, he walked on them a few times before falling. "OWW," he whined, despite not actually being hurt. There was a second of silence before Usopp spoke up again, voice resigned. "That damn butler, insulting my dad like that," he said, staring at his lap. Luffy, who now sat in front of him his back to Usopp nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I hate that guy too," he agreed. No matter what anyone says, Usopp was a great pirate. Luffy continued, frowning as he leaned back on his hands, watching the sea lazily moving below them. "Yeah, huh?" Usopp asked eagerly, a smile on his face and negative emotions gone as he moved beside Luffy, smiling to him. "In this day and age where pirates are everywhere, I'm proud of my old man for living with his life on the line at sea. Yet, that bastard stomped all over my pride. He'll pay for this," Usopp said, the frustration returning as he stood, fists clenched at his sides. Silently, Luffy agreed with him, because there was no way he'd leave here now knowing there was someone with a dark aura here. Especially when his new friend Usopp was still here. "But you're not gonna go see the girl anymore?" Luffy asked instead, turning his head to look at Usopp. The long-nosed man stiffened, his fists unclenching before he crossed his arms and looked away. "Why yeah, I dunno. If that butler comes and apologizes to me, I might consider it," Usopp said, Luffy feeling his turmoil. Feeling something else though, he turned, spotting said butler and another guy down on the shore below them. "That butler?" he asked, pointing to them. Usopp looked, hands on his hips, and nodded. "Yeah, that butler. What's that butler doing out here?" Usopp shouted in surprise, falling to the ground and pushing Luffy's face into the ground as he did. "Ow, that hurts," Luffy whined, voice muffled by the ground, but again, not actually hurt. If anything, it was only mildly uncomfortable. "Hey, Django. I told you to avoid doing anything to make you stand out. Yet you go and sleep in the middle of the village," Klahador said, addressing the man with him, his voice drifting up to the two eavesdroppers. "Don't be stupid. I don't stand out one bit. I'm not weird, either," Django said defensively, one leg bent at the knee as he held his open jacket in one hand and his hat with the other. "There's someone else with him. A weird guy," Luffy said to Usopp as they watched. "Never seen him before. Who is he?" Usopp asked, mostly to himself as he continued holding Luffy's head down, though no longer in the ground like he'd done before. "So, preparations for the plan are ready, I hope?" Klahador asked, making Luffy frown at the darkness that rose in the man. "Of course, we can start anytime. The rich girl assassination plan," Django announced loudly, Usopp's anger rising at the words and Luffy's frown deepening. Even though this Django person didn't even have gray in his aura, he was still going along with this butler guy's plan apparently, one Luffy could tell already was no good. Assassination? Usopp asked. Don't call it an assassination, Django. That has a bad ring to it. Klahadore reprimanded. Oh, right, accident. It's an accident. Django agreed. Accident. Assassination. What are these guys up to? Usopp asked in a mixture of fear, anger, and worry. We can't simply kill her. Miss Kaya must perish in an unfortunate accident. Don't mess that up, Klahadore told the man as he began walking away. Django sat on a rock, hands now in his pockets. So basically, on your signal, the men and I storm the village and kill the girl. And then you'll get her inheritance. Django said, reciting the plan, to which Klahadore's frustration rose and he turned back to Django. You fool, you do not understand a thing. How would I, an outsider, inherit Kaya's estate? He asked, his own hands in his pockets. You'll work hard too, Django asked, making a pose as he did. Working hard won't amount to squat. Listen, this is the most important thing. Before you kill her, you'll use hypnosis to make Kaya write her will to say, I leave my entire fortune to my butler, Klahadore. He said, pointing a finger in Django's face, his greed and darkness continuing to rise, making Luffy increasingly uncomfortable. Only then will I inherit her enormous fortune, in a completely ordinary manner. I've spent 3 long years gaining the trust of everyone around me so that it would be unsurprising for her to leave her inheritance to me. He finished, Django standing. 3 years as a butler for that, huh? But you sure scared us back then, Captain Kuro. 3 years ago, you suddenly said you were giving up life as a pirate. In no time flat you set up a subordinate to be your double, then let the world see Captain Kuro get executed. So that was the very beginning of this plan. You truly are Kuro, man of 1,000 plans. Django praised, but Klahadore, or Kuro rather, was only annoyed by it. Don't call me that. I abandoned that name 3 years ago. I now want to obtain great sums of money without the government on my back. In other words, I'm a pacifist. Kuro said with a grin, Django laughing at the words. Luffy didn't know what pacifist meant, but whatever it was, he could feel the life from Kuro as he said it. Some pacifist you are, killing off an entire rich family for this piece of yours. Django laughed. Hang on now, the father's death was real. I hadn't planned on that. Kuro admitted. Django shrugged, shoving his hands back in his pockets. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyways, hurry and give the signal. We've been sitting in the waters near here for a whole week now. The men are starting to grow impatient. Django told him. Ah, that reminds me. Kuro said, his good mood changing as he frowned. It seems there's a Whitebeard pirate on this island. He said to Django, the mont's eyes bugging. Whitebeard. On this island. Django nearly screeched. Kuro's frown deepened, but he didn't remark on the outburst. Yes. According to him, he's left the Emperor's crew to start one of his own. As it stands now, it doesn't seem like he should get in the way of our plans, so try and avoid him, will you? Kuro requested, his frown never letting up. Django only blinked, trying to process everything he was hearing, but eventually he nodded quickly. Why, you don't have to worry, Captain Kuro. The guys and I will steer clear of anything and anyone that could stop your plans. Django reassured. Kuro sighed at the overt display of false confidence but nodded. This is seriously bad, Usopp whisper shouted. Beside him Luffy glanced to the long-nosed man, feeling his turbulent emotions and blocking them the best he could. He didn't like what he was hearing any more than Usopp, and the fact that Kuro had both the dark feeling and aura made him ready to attack him any second. Captain Kuro is said to be the smartest and most brutal pirate of all. Word had it the Navy caught and executed him 3 years ago, but Captain Kuro is alive. As Klahadore the butler, they're gonna attack the village. Kaya's in danger too. Bad. This is seriously bad, Usopp said, voice slowly getting louder and his emotions becoming stronger to the point they were starting to influence Luffy. The team began feeling Usopp's anxiety and fear start taking hold in himself as his hands started shaking slightly. Because he was suddenly so focused on forcing the feelings out, forcing himself to realize it wasn't his anxiety or fear he was feeling, but instead Usopp's, he didn't notice as Kuro and Django both left the shore, leaving Usopp and Luffy alone on the cliff's edge. Usopp was still talking to himself, slowly getting louder, but Luffy forced himself to ignore it. Take deep breaths. Focus on your own emotions, not other people's. Deep breaths. A few minutes passed and Usopp was standing now, announcing how he had to do something, warn the villagers and Kaya, but before he could run off to do so Luffy stopped him, standing and grabbing the long-nosed mont's shoulder. Finally, Luffy's second-hand anxiety and fear were gone, instead replaced with his previous anger towards Kuro. Hey, what are you doing? I have to go warn Kaya and the villagers before it's too late. Usopp said worriedly to Luffy, his fear almost taking hold of Luffy again. Don't worry, we'll stop them before they can hurt anyone, Luffy said with a serious face. Wait, how are we going to do that? You heard them, that was Captain Kuro. A real pirate, with a real pirate crew. Usopp shouted, making Luffy pout. Hey, I'm a real pirate too. And it might not be big, but I have a crew too. Luffy said indignantly, crossing his arms over his chest. Usopp blinked at him once before shrieking and backing away from Luffy quickly. I forgot. Klaha Kuro. He said you were Monkey D. Luffy, that whitebeard pirate everyone was talking about. Usopp shouted in a new fear, realizing Luffy himself was probably a bigger threat than Kuro and his crew combined. Well, yeah, but there's no reason to be scared of me. Luffy pouted again, hating that was always everyone's reactions. Scared. I'm not scared, Usopp said, trying to stand tall, but his legs were trembling beneath him. Liar. Luffy deadpanned, making Usopp, in fear at being found out so easily. It's not like I'm gonna hurt you or anything. You're my friend. And that Kubo guy is a bad guy who I want to fight. Luffy explained in hopes of calming the team. It didn't seem to do much, but Usopp did at least stop shaking, though he was still very obviously wary of Luffy. Kubo. You mean Kuro? Of course, he's a bad guy. We just overheard his plan to kill Kayak. They're gonna kill Kaya. We have to go stop them. Usopp shouted, the conversation going in circles now. I already said we will. Geez, don't you know how to listen? Luffy asked in annoyance, huffing as he grabbed Usopp's wrist and began dragging him towards where he could smell Nami and Zoro. As they walked, Usopp continued sputtering out nonsense, trying to free his wrist from Luffy's grip, but to no avail. By the time they were walking down the road Luffy knew his friends were on. Usopp had stopped struggling as was allowing himself to be dragged, though he hadn't stopped talking nonsense the entire time. Oh, Luffy, you're back. Nami said as she hopped off the fence. Captain, the children called as they ran over to Usopp happily. Luffy let go of the teen's wrist at that, trusting he wouldn't run off now, and walked over to Zoro and Nami. So you were with that guy then, Zoro said, he and Nami having guessed as much earlier. Yup, we heard that butler guy was a bad guy, so we're gonna beat him up. Luffy said to the two, only confusing them. Wait, what butler guy? Klahadore, Nami asked, trying to figure out who they were supposedly going to beat up and why. Yeah, but his name isn't Klaha whatever, it's actually Kudos, Luffy told them, Usopp face palming behind him. Kuro. His name is Captain Kuro, the man of 1,000 plans. Usopp said. The children weren't there anymore, but that didn't matter to Luffy, or Nami and Zoro for that matter as they both raised their eyebrows. Captain Kuro. Nami asked in surprise, having heard of the man herself. I thought he died a few years ago, Zoro said in confusion. Yeah, but he didn't. That's not the point. The point is, he's a bad guy, so I'm gonna beat him up before he can hurt the villagers and that girl in the big house. Luffy said, wondering why everyone cared so much about the details. Now hold on a second. Okay, so that butler is actually a pirate, but he's been working as their butler. Why? And why are you beating him up now? Nami asked, not understanding. As much as she hated pirates, Klahadore, or Kuro, didn't seem to be causing any harm here. In fact, no one even knew he was a pirate. He's planning on killing Kaya and stealing her fortune. His crew's on their way here once he gives the signal and they're gonna attack the village. Usopp told them worriedly. Okay, let me get this straight. So Klahadore, Kaya's butler, is actually a pirate captain named Kuro. Nami started, Usopp and Luffy nodding. And his plan this whole time was to take Kaya's money, Zoro said next, the two nodding again. So he's going to kill her and attack the village. Nami continued, her words met with more nodding. And all we have to do is beat them up and stop them. Zoro finished, Luffy and Usopp nodding once more. Alright, I'm in, Zoro said with a shrug, Luffy smiling at that. So what's the plan? Nami asked with a sigh, not seeing any way around this. She didn't want anyone getting hurt, and if that meant they had to fight some pirates, then so be it. Besides, think of all the treasure she could get. Luffy laughed, grinning widely as he put his hands behind his head. No clue, he said, despite the situation they were in. Nami and Zoro facepalmed at this while Usopp watched them with wide eyes, not having expected this. You guys are going to fight with me. Why? Usopp asked, trying to fight tears from forming. I already told you, they're bad guys, and I like you, so of course I'll help you, Luffy said as if it were obvious and really it should be by now, he had told him this a bunch of times before. Yeah, and, scared, is written all over your face, Zoro said to him. Me, scared. I'm perfectly okay with lots of bad guys or whatever. Because I'm Captain Usopp, brave warrior of the sea. He boasted, though his legs were shaking. Damn it, this isn't a show. These are Kuro's pirates we're dealing with. Of course I'm scared. What's wrong with that? I don't want your sympathy. You guys can leave. Leave. Usopp shouted to them. We ain't laughing. We're helping cause we want to and you're a good guy. Zoro said, annoyed that Usopp wasn't getting it. As if we'd risk our lives because of sympathy. Luffy told him, equally annoyed. This seemed to finally reach Usopp as he stared at them, legs stopping in their shaking as the tears came back, this time falling down his face. Oh, you guys. Usopp cried. But I call dibs on all the treasure. Nami yelled, Luffy laughing at that and Zoro smiling. With that, Usopp stood taller, hands on his hips as he grinned. No problem. In that case, Captain Usopp knows exactly what we can do. It's still early, which means we have time to prepare. The ship still needs to get here, and that means they'll have to dock at the beach, but we'll be ready for them. He boasted, Zoro and Nami listening in interest while Luffy watched with wide eyes. Now, here's the plan, Usopp said as he turned to the slope leading towards the village, walking over to it while everyone else followed. Alright, they're going to attack from this shore at daybreak. But the only route into the village is this one slope. Everything else is cliff, making it tougher to come through. In other words, if we can defend this slope to the death, the village won't get attacked. He explained, walking up the slope with the three until they were at the top. Oh, that's easy, Luffy said cheerily. Talking about it is, but the rest depends on our strength. What can you guys do? Usopp asked them because he didn't really know the three all that well. They'd only met earlier that morning after all, and the only thing he really knew about them was that they were pirates, and in Luffy's case, he was a notorious criminal. He tried to will away the fear as he remembered that, tried reminding himself that Luffy was, thankfully, on his side. Cut, stretch, steal, I can hide, Usopp said after everyone gave an answer. You're gonna fight. The three yelled at Usopp, who paled, tears forming as he sweat. I'm just kidding. Geez, Usopp cried, though Luffy felt the lie. Slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash slash backslash. Sometime later, the four were admiring the work they'd done. In front of them, there were 3 barrels spilling oil from them, slicking the slope up to the point that anyone unlucky enough to step on it would slip and fall instantly. Alright, perfect, Usopp said with a smile, hands on his hips. Now they won't be able to climb up this slope, thanks to all this oil we've laid out here. We'll let him slip and slide on this slope, then beat the crap out of him while they flail about. Usopp grinned, obviously pleased with his work. Oil, huh? Nami asked, she and Zoro moving closer to it. No matter what, we will protect this slope, Usopp said. Conversely, let's just hope that none of us slip down there, Nami said. Luffy, who was sitting on the ground near the oil, began carefully stepping on the oil, testing it. It'd be like diving right into an antlion pit. The navigator told them, I'm amazed you came up with this, Luffy said, turning his head to address Usopp. But of course, when it comes to plans and slingshots, I'm utterly confident, he boasted, crossing his arms over his chest and standing tall. Everyone smiled to him at his words, finding it nice to see the man when he wasn't so scared all the time. Well anyway, it's still early in the morning. They won't be here until daybreak tomorrow, right? Zoro asked, Usopp nodding. Then we should make sure that no one comes over here and slips down there before then, the swordsman said, sitting against the cliff wall as he did. You're right, we should set up a watch, that way we can make sure Kuro himself doesn't find this or anyone from the village. Nami agreed. I can stay first, Zoro offered, eyes closing as he rested against the wall. I'll go next. Luffy, you can go after me and then Usopp. We'll switch off every 2 hours. Nami decided, everyone nodding in understanding. Bye Zoro. See you later, Luffy said with a smile and a wave as he stood up, leaving with the others. Zoro nodded their way before closing his eyes, relaxing further against the cliff wall. Well, what now? Luffy asked after a minute of walking. Well, I'm going to go look around for a bit. It'd be a good idea to think about restocking the boats with food before we leave here, and seeing as you and Zoro don't have money of your own, I'll have to pay for it. Of course, with a small fee. You understand, right? Nami asked Luffy sweetly, and he could feel the rising greed, the almost ill intentions despite her nice-sounding words, but he shrugged it off, more excited over the prospect of free food. Yeah, he told her, Nami grinning widely at that. Leave it to me then. See you guys later, she told them as she turned her course towards the village. With the woman gone now, it was only Usopp and Luffy left, and because of that, Luffy was focused solely on the long-nosed man's emotions, the man's worry and fear rising again and making him sigh. You don't have to be so scared all the time, you know, Luffy told him, hands behind his head and stance casual as he walked. Usopp looked to him in surprise, blinking. Scared? What makes you say that? Usopp asked hesitantly, trying to smile and sound normal but failing miserably. I can feel it. You don't have to be scared of me. Or those pirates. We'll fight them all and keep everyone safe, Luffy said confidently, as if he knew for a fact what the outcome of this fight would be. Honestly, he kind of did, knowing that it was extremely unlikely that he'd find anyone too threatening in the East Blue, the weakest of the seas. You can feel it? Usopp asked in confusion, not having expected that to be Luffy's reasoning for knowing. He knew that sometimes he wasn't the best at hiding his emotions, lying desperately to hide it instead, but Luffy hadn't said that he saw it, he said he'd felt it. Yeah, your fear, and your worry. Oh, and I guess your confusion now too, Luffy said, having no qualms about sharing this with the man. What do you mean? How can you feel that? Usopp asked, wondering if Luffy was lying to him, but if he was, it was extremely convincing. Wait, hadn't the news about Luffy been that he was crazy? A mental hospital escapee? I just can't. That doesn't matter though. What matters is it's alright, everything's going to be fine. Luffy said reassuringly. Despite the words though, Usopp couldn't help but still feel that way, skeptical of Luffy's so-called ability to feel his emotions. So is it just my emotions you can feel? He asked instead, momentarily forgetting about the fact that Luffy was a big bad pirate, forgetting the village was going to be attacked by tomorrow morning. It was nice to have a distraction, even if it was a big elaborate lie from the straw-hatted man. Or conversely, a story from a crazy man. Either was a valid option at this point. Nah, I can feel everyone's emotions. Zoro's, Nami's, yours, those kids, Kaya's, Kumo's, even him. Luffy said, naming people on his fingers before pointing to a villager that they were walking past. What's he feeling now then? Usopp asked curiously. Even if he didn't believe it, he wanted to keep the conversation going, to keep the distraction going. Calm, happy, a little annoyed about something. I think it's directed towards someone he knows, Luffy said, head tilting as he read the man's emotions. Usopp had to admit, Luffy was invested in this. What about them? Usopp asked, pointing to a woman that was sweeping the stoop of her home. Oh, she's annoyed too, maybe she's annoyed at the guy then. Nay, Usopp, do they know each other? Luffy asked, recognizing the similar emotion in the two and the fact it was both directed to people they knew. Yeah, lucky guess. Usopp said, eyebrows furrowing in even more confusion at the accurate assumption. It wasn't proof or anything though. After all, it was a small village, it was only natural people would know each other. Shishishi, I think they got into an argument or something. It's not my business though. Marco always told me that people's emotions are their own and I shouldn't tell others about them, but that was mostly because he didn't like when I told people he was lying. Luffy said with a fond smile, looking to the sky. Marco, the long-nosed man asked, not recognizing the name. Not to mention, it was another piece to this strange story lie that Luffy was telling him. Sure, he told fancy stories to Kaya all the time, but rarely did he add anyone else into them, especially people with names, because if you forgot the name or used a real person it was that much easier to be caught up in the lie. Yeah, you know, Marco the Phoenix. He was my ship brother back on Pop's crew. Everyone always asked me if he was lying about certain things, and he got annoyed when I told them so he said I couldn't do that anymore because it was an image of primary. Luffy said, confusing Usopp. Image of primary? He asked, not understanding what that meant. Oh, wait, maybe it was envision of posture. Luffy asked to himself, never remembering the correct wording. Image, envision, invasion, Usopp asked, trying to guess the first word. Yeah, Luffy said excitedly. Invasion of privacy. Was that it? He asked, again receiving an excited nod from Luffy. Yeah, he told me it was an invasion of privacy so I shouldn't tell people what others are feeling. You didn't believe me though. Well, you still don't, but I thought you might if I told you. Luffy said with a shrug, not taking it personally that the man wasn't believing his story. What? Of course I believe you. Usopp said nervously, shocked that Luffy had figured that out. He thought he'd played the part of a believer pretty well, but apparently not. Liar, Luffy said with a smile, laughing lightly to himself. Usopp gaped at him, not sure how to respond for a moment. Wait, so you can feel people's emotions, but lying isn't an emotion. Usopp said, trying to find the flaws now so Luffy would crumble and tell him it was all a lie. No, but people don't feel genuine when they tell lies, so I always know when they're lying, Luffy said as if it were obvious. Usopp narrowed his eyes at that, getting an idea. I'm a millionaire, he said with a straight face and tone, Luffy's smile growing at the words. Liar. Alright, maybe that one had been a bit obvious, but he would surely catch Luffy now because there was no way he could really feel his lying. My favorite color is red, he said next. Liar. My favorite food is mushrooms. Liar. You hate them. How did you know that? Usopp asked in surprise, not having expected the last bit of detail. Because you felt like you did. Duh, Luffy said as if he were stupid for not realizing that. Usopp blinked, and a small part of him began to believe Luffy now. You know, my mom, she's waiting for me. I should go check on her. Usopp said nervously now, smiling and pointing over his shoulder, because honestly he was getting a little scared now. Luffy pouted at that, arms falling to his side. If you didn't want to hang out anymore you could just say so. I told you, I know you're lying. Luffy said, a bit sad that Usopp wasn't believing him. This made the man in question stiffen, heart in his throat as he gaped at Luffy, freezing in place. But, that's not possible. Usopp almost shouted, because, after all of that, Luffy had gotten every answer right, even things that he'd have no way of knowing about Usopp after only knowing him for this short period of time. Yes, it is, Luffy told him in response. He was living proof that it was possible. And no, people aren't supposed to be able to feel other people's feelings. It's unnatural, Usopp said, his eyes still wide and legs shaking slightly. That's not nice, Luffy muttered quietly as he frowned. Maybe telling Usopp hadn't been as good an idea as he'd first thought. You. Usopp was at a loss for words, not sure how to respond as he paled. What was he saying? Was he trying to get himself killed? It was so easy for him to forget that not only was Luffy a pirate himself, but he was a Whitebeard pirate. He'd had a bounty on his head for years now, and the Marines hadn't caught him or his brothers once since they'd escaped the mental hospital. Yet, here he was, practically insulting the man and asking to be attacked. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Usopp stopped talking again, trailing off as he found it hard to form words. His voice was at a slightly higher pitch than normal, his skin almost ashy compared to its usual color, and his legs much more visibly shaking now. It's fine. You're scared and I shouldn't have told you about it. Sabo and Ace said normal people get scared of things they don't really understand, so it's my fault. Sorry. See you later, Usopp. Luffy said, his frown never leaving his face as he began walking away from him, his movements much slower and somber compared to earlier. Usopp could only watch him walk away because for as bad as he felt, that man walking away was still a dangerous criminal that could turn on him at any moment. That didn't stop the guilt from forming inside him, however.